Welcome to this public webinar with the MacArthur Foundation. Today we're going to run through our latest project, Circular Economy in Cities. The main purpose is, of course, to share the key insights from the project, but also to show you how to use all the public resources that we've been creating. I'm Maja Johannessen. I'm a research analyst with the foundation and been working on the project for the last year.
I'm Miranda Schnitger. I've been leading the project also for the last year, working together with Maja and a few others.
And today is going to be, we will have conversations, discussions. We want you to engage as much as possible. So if you can see, there is like a comment box in the Hangout. So please add your comments or thoughts, or if you have other examples that you like to share or feed into the conversation, we would love for you to engage. Also, we would love to hear where you're from. So if my colleague Seb, who is dealing with all the tech, he can share a poll. We do some polls throughout the session. I don't know if have you shared it?
Yes, it should be with you now.
All right. So yeah, we just wanted you to, if you can click on the poll and just click on which background you have. So if you work for a city or work in academia with the city's topic, or just a private person who are just really interested in cities, we'll love to hear where you're from. Just letting people. So while I'm letting you answer that question, I just wanted to quickly recap on who the MacArthur Foundation is. We are a charity in the UK, solely set up to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. And we do that by working across 5 areas. So first of all, we work with business. So we engage businesses through our global partners, but also in our various of networks, so around development of new solutions or scaling up and so on. Then we work with learning, so it's about working with universities and formal learning, but also informal learning, such as the Disruptive Innovation Festival or sessions like this where we share insights publicly. Then our systemic initiatives, where we bring stakeholders across the value chain of a specific material together, so the plastic packaging, food, fashion. Then we have our institutions, government and cities, where we work with policymakers on creating the enabling conditions for a circular economy. And then finally, of course, we have insight analysis, where we are doing all the research and gathering our evidence for the circular economy. Yeah. So have we got the poll through? Take a few more minutes. So maybe while we give it a few more minutes, Miranda, maybe you could start with giving us the context of the project. So why is the foundation interested in cities?
Okay. Hi everyone. I hope that poll is relatively intuitive to fill in. Cities are a really important location and stakeholder for how we see the transition to the circular economy. And that's not least because over 50% of us already live in cities, and it's projected that by 2050, that will be at least 2/3, possibly even 3/4 of the world living in urban cities. So that's the primary reason for looking at cities, or the first reason why we've turned our attention there. But then actually diving into what goes on in cities, not only are they economic engines for our economy, but they also draw in a phenomenal number of resources. So 75% of natural resources are consumed in cities. But at the same time, 60 to 80% of the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, are coming from cities, and also already over 50% of waste is coming from cities. And with the population only projected to increase, if we continue with our current model, that is only going to increase, and that causes a headache for all manner of people. I don't know if we're sharing slides at the same time.
We're not, but I can quickly put them up. There we go.
Great. So there's a recap of the sort of primary headline reasons why cities is a really important focal point for a lot of the work at the foundation. And Maja just provided a bit of a recap on the different areas that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation works in. Cities is one of them, but this project has specifically looked at cities and policymakers, but cities also appear in all sorts of our other work. So Maja mentioned the learning, cities is often a theme in the DIF, also in additional learning programs that we're running. Cities also a really important part in our systemic initiatives, signing the global commitment, being part of our food project, which we won't talk about a lot here, but I'm sure you can find out more through other channels. And they're also an important part of textiles too. So the numbers are big and they're really important for all EMF work streams.
But Miranda, like, why should cities then be interested in the circular economy then?
So another thing that we did at the start of the project is look at city plans from around the world. I think we looked at 5 to 10. Do you want to show the next slide? Yeah, great. I think we looked at 5 to 10 plans from across all the different continents, looking to pick out common themes that were there. And actually what was really interesting is actually, whilst they're busy, as you can see from this slide, there's plenty of priorities. There's also an awful lot of consistency in the kind of topics that come up. Housing is a major issue for cities, unsurprisingly, with the populations growing. So how can there be enough space to house all of us and to house the economic activity we take place? So the businesses and the economics opportunities that we're exploring. Transport, another really common theme for cities. In a very loose poll that we did, asking people about the negative things that they associate with current cities, congestion comes up as a recurrent topic time and time again, and that's reflected in these city plans. And the other thing that was really consistent was the importance of finding an economic growth model that provides the jobs that we need, creates a healthy living environment, manages city budgets well. So actually, when we looked at all these city plans, it was really clear that many of the things that we're saying that circular economy can help towards is one of the things that cities are already focused on. So it's not about asking circular economy to be an additional objective, but actually breaking down the framework, identifying where it fits with existing city priorities, and then showing how that will be supportive of what's already taking place. I don't know if we're showing them a slide at the moment or not anymore. No, we're not anymore. Yeah, so that was one of the big things. And the other thing that also came through was housing, mobility, and we looked at products. So the broad things that every person that lives in a city will consume. So be that furniture, be that the plastic containers, that the items that you're buying from the shops will come in, be that the clothes that you wear. Those are some of the big things that we looked at, but also noticing how this also supports some of the work that cities are wanting to do and already doing around the Sustainable Development Goals, and also on climate, i.e. bringing down the greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah. And we will dive a bit more into that later, share a bit more on the scope and some of the key case examples and benefits that we found in our research. But I think to go on to the next topic, so you said we were directing this at urban policymakers specifically. So how come that we chose that target group for the project?
Yeah. I think in our view, to achieve a systems change, you are going to need to involve all sorts of people from all walks of life. So businesses will play a really important part. It's really important that universities and schools are aware of this concept and exploring it further and teaching people about it. But without a shadow of a doubt, it's really important that policy also is there to enable the right kind of behaviour and activities to take place. So policymakers for sure are a really important stakeholder to us. Yeah. We at the Foundation have done a previous bit of work targeting the national agenda, and this time around we looked to focus it more specifically on cities.
Yeah, should we share the framework that you came to with this project?
Yes.
And just open it up.
Did you want to do a poll first?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, cool.
Where did it go? 2 seconds.
Bear with us as we manage between the slides and the camera view.
Yeah, there we have it.
So Maja was just pushing me to go a bit further on why it is and what it is that we were looking to identify in terms of what policymakers can do, especially at the urban level. And it is, broadly speaking, policy, regulation, these are terms that are already associated with making the change. But we wanted to dig a little bit deeper than that and identify what were the different opportunity buckets actually that policymakers could work in order to accelerate the transition. So on this slide, we've included sort of two complementary frameworks. The first, next to the spine of the slide, shows you 10 different policy levers that we explored during the project. So setting roadmaps and overarching strategies is, of course, really important, and it's what we looked at when we very first started the project to identify those primary priorities for cities. Including circular economy in these roadmaps and strategies means that circular economy can then begin to be mainstreamed, and there are multiple cities around the world that are already doing this. I think several of them are actually probably on the call. It's being explored in London, it's being explored in Charlotte in the US, it's being explored in various Chinese cities. It's beginning, and hopefully it will continue to grow. But there are multiple other things that cities can also do. Some of them are a bit more sort of classic, like fiscal incentives. These, on the whole, the ones that we've seen that have been successful are really encouraging of good behaviour. Or on the other hand, it can be very much around capacity building and awareness raising, which may seem a little bit softer, but actually can be incredibly powerful because of the need to engage lots of people in the system.
Yeah, because like when we talk to cities, they often what we meet is like, oh, but we can't put in laws or regulations. So what can we do? Yeah, and it's been interesting with this project that we found so many examples of so many other things that cities are doing.
Yeah, that ability for cities, and it's true of many government tiers, cities not being one of them too, that ability to convene people around a topic, learn from other partners, so for example businesses coming to the table as to what their needs are, but also share what the policy scenario is and work out how that could be changed, is a really powerful one. Many of the strategies involve a lot of this. I know Brussels, which is one of the case studies that we looked at, convened I think over 300 people in the city in order to identify how they would develop their roadmap. So that sort of bringing people together, and the ability of government organisations, and particularly cities, because they're so close to the front line to doing that, was a really effective and powerful one.
Yes, should we talk a bit about how they interact and overlap? Because we did a lot of like back and forth on this framework, because it's like defining those policy levers can be quite hard because they're a bit fluffy, and then this like Bell diagram we here have on the right, that was like one of the outcomes of all that moving around.
I think I certainly started with an assumption that it would be quite easy to define and put into unique categories different things that cities can do. But the reality is, of course, that much of this stuff interlinks. First of all, on the diagram that lists the 10 levers, we identified which ones sort of sit together in a similar kind of family. So, for example, the dark green ones, urban planning, asset management, public procurement, they roughly sit together in a group that we've called urban management. But taking action in that area is not without the other policy levers. So in the Bell diagram, which is on the far side of the slide, we've indicated how these different categories link to each other. So it's not that you can only do one or the other. You can use regulation in order to support what you're trying to do in public procurement or in urban planning. You can use it, of course, to underpin any fiscal changes that you're trying to make. So that diagram is sort of showing that actually these things are all interlinked. And what we found useful in terms of developing this framework and talking to people about it was identify the 10 different buckets in which action can take place, but not set it so rigidly that it looks like it's either or. It's definitely a case of bringing things together. Engagement, there you can see in the center, the sort of slightly softer bucket. We put it in the center because it really cuts across everything.
And all of this you can find on the project webpage. We're in a 30-page paper.
Yes.
Yeah, where you can read more. And when you read it and you think, oh, we have other examples, or like we are doing this, like please, like send us an email. We would love to hear more about what's happening. And
in the paper we've got, I think, at least 100 examples. And there's no At the moment, I would definitely argue that circular economy, I mean, it's very much a transition. There is no one place where it's all happening perfectly. So there are lots of different pockets of examples of things taking place. At the moment, there isn't one complete system where everything has been changed in order to fully incentivize circular economy. So that means that there's certainly other examples out there and also more to come. And we hope that actually some of this will inspire additional changes.
Oh, and I can see we have the poll in. So we have 30% comes from city or city administration, 25% public sector, and 20% private, 13 others, and 12 academia. So that's a nice broad mix of people we have here.
It's a good mix, and it's so reflective of the number of examples that we found in the project where, yes, we have focused this on cities and we have put together this framework for policymakers, but it is not possible to think of these different categories in isolation. Like, it's really important that the different actors actually know about these concepts and then collaborate and work together in order to change the system. So that's actually really exciting because it's reflective of a lot of what we found.
Yeah, and I just wanted to remind you that we can take questions throughout this entire session. So if you have anything, just put your comments in the question box and we will bring it up as we go along. Should we move on to the next one, the evidence base?
Yeah, Maja, I'm going to switch and ask you a couple of questions because you led on the evidence base. Can you tell people a little bit about what are we talking about when we say evidence base? What is it that we've put out there?
Yeah, so there was one of the main questions that we got from the cities that we work with that is yeah, we kind of understand the circular economy framework and we kind of know it's important, but can you put could you put more numbers to it? Like, why is it specifically that cities need to change? What are the drivers for change in cities? What are the concrete opportunities? So key actions that you can implement at the city level. And what are the benefits? And is it only linked to resources or like broader types of benefits?
And in terms of the final output, did we I think, are we sharing a slide at the moment?
Yes, we're sharing a slide.
What is it that people are seeing on their screen?
So this is the fact sheet. So we divided all this, this was there was a lot of information. So we tried to kind of boil it down to some really easy accessible fact sheets. So it's very much fact sheet format with pieces of key information with references. So it's not going to be exhaustive. You're not going to learn everything in here, but there will be references to absolutely everything. So you can move on, and I think there's hyperlinks and page numbers. So it's very easy to read more if you want to know more.
And can you say a bit about what were the major systems that we looked at in the fact sheets?
Yes, so we're going to take the next slide.
Okay.
So the main three systems, as you mentioned, are what we call buildings, mobility, and products. And it's because first of all, they're quite resource intense and key to cities to fill urban needs. But they're also quite interlinked. So, for example, how you plan your built environment, like where you're going to build your building, how dense are the buildings, is this building stock, what are you using for, have massive impact on your transport mobility scheme, because that means how far do you have to drive, for example, or also where can you actually, if you want to have local production in the city, do you actually have built space for that, and so on. So throughout the fact sheets, we will constantly highlight those interlinkages. So kind of acknowledge that often city administrations works in sectors or within a certain system, but that there needs to be that more systemic and holistic view to reap all the opportunities.
And jumping back to what I was saying earlier about how we decided to shape the project, this was actually really exciting for us, wasn't it? Because these three systems use an awful lot of resources, but these three systems are also areas in which cities currently have key objectives that they want to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the buildings, of course, linked to the big need for housing. I think it's 1/3 of urban residents are actually struggling to get decent housing. Mobility, 2 to 3% of global GDP is lost in congestion. And then think of all the pollution issues that we're also having. And then with products, it's first of all, household consumer goods are such a big part of the solid waste streams in cities that often it's public budgets that's using to deal with. But also the production and consumption of these products could also generate a lot of economic opportunities in terms of jobs and economic development. So those 3 systems were really great in terms of capturing key opportunities.
And can you say a little bit about, maybe come out of the slide for a second, but at the what were some of the sources for the evidence that we were collecting? Where did we get our case for change from?
So in terms of like how we did the research, it was very much in terms of doing literature studies. So first on building on the reports the foundation has produced already and the framework. So listed out all the different concepts and then starting to really deep dive on like the different aspects. So for example, I spent an entire day looking into 3D printing and then figuring out how does that link with the circular economy, how does it link with cities, and then kind of write that into a collected narrative.
Great. So yeah, and we'll show you at the end the website and sort of walk you through where everything is so you can play around with it and find it later. But yeah, there's EMF sources, there's Arup sources who are a partner on the project with us.
The Arup has a broad range of resources that we of course use, but then we also run internal workshops, so they're fed in with like expertise from their own teams, and that's been really helpful as well.
Yeah. And the CE100, which I think some of the people on the call might be from our CE100 network. We had various conversations with members in the network. UNEP was a partner on the project, a partner of the EMF Foundation, and we use multiple UN sources as well as OECD and so on and so forth. So it was quite a lot that we drew on, I think.
Yeah.
And in terms of the we sort of said these are 3 priority systems for cities. What about the benefits? Why start changing the system in order to allow circular economy opportunities to come through? What's the outcome?
Yeah, so in terms of the benefits, what we kind of realized going through all these like opportunities and the case example is that the range of benefit is quite broad. So while even though the circular economy is focusing on materials, the benefits also range from increased quality of life, like reduced pollution, increased productivity. And I can show you we kind of divided. So there was like a very broad range of benefits that we then divided into 5 overarching categories.
And they're consistent with broad. I mean, often when I'm out on sort of talking to people, I hear economic, environmental, and social, and the 5 buckets are consistent with that.
Yeah. And it's just a way to make it a bit more granular to break it down a bit. And then what we do, because as you understand, the scope is massive, so we broke it down in 5 phases. So when you look at the fact sheet, you can see there are 3 systems, but there is also these 5 phases that we call planning, designing, making, accessing, operating, and maintaining. And this is just so we linked opportunities to that like phase as well.
So I'm quite a big fan of quite simple frameworks, but also they can seem a bit abstract at the beginning. So I think you've got a couple of examples to talk us a bit through why we've got planning, designing, making, accessing, and operating.
Yes. So if we first with planning, so within products, here's some of the examples here is around how cities both can focus on stimulating upstream to work with businesses around designing better projects or scaling up better business solutions. So one of the case exams we highlight is Advanced London, run by a London Waste and Recycling Board. So it's interesting how the waste agency in the city then starts working with upstream business support while also dealing with the more downstream waste management.
Interesting. So planning not only applies to buildings and mobility, but we're also saying there's a planning opportunity, perhaps in a slightly different way, in products.
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of linking strategic areas together, and then making sure that upstream and downstream also speak to each other, because there is a tendency to focus only on the waste management, which is of course also really important. That's one of the 2 legs, but if you focus upstream on actually ensuring that the products, in this case, that comes into the system actually can be reused or recycled or whatever, however managed within that city system that they are intact in.
So it's partly planning and on the resources side, partly planning for I'm going to say resource management. We currently call it waste management, but in this future world, we're designing out waste. So there's downstream resource management, and then there's initiatives that are more upstream that are working with businesses to change the way products are made in the first place, so that they don't really end up in this sort of post-use phase. Okay.
And then the second phase is designing, and then I took the examples from mobility. And here, this is a DHL QB cycle. So this is a freight vehicle. They are doing deliveries, and they kind of completely redesigned the delivery vehicle and the delivery system. So they have these I think electric cubic cycle where they can they work really a lot better with the city context, because they have especially in the city center, you have narrow roads, there's not a lot of parking spots. Freight vehicles are usually big and are dangerous to people living in the city. So what they have done is literally completely redesign the vehicle who are going to deliver things. And then, so that's one example of getting rid of the pollution and a lot of the risk related to freight.
So it's the redesign of the mobility vehicle in this case.
Yeah.
And interesting, therefore, you're emphasizing that we didn't just look at the mobility of humans, people, but also the mobility of goods.
Yeah, and that's hugely important, because we're also talking about in a circular economy, we were going to recirculate a lot of materials, but also products. We're going to share more. So there's going to be a growing need for delivery services and collection. So the freight sector is so important to get included in this, in the transport planning, and how are you going to engage that, and how are you going to meet that freight needs going forward.
Great.
We also looked at infrastructure, but given the time, I think we're going to move on to the next phase. So making here, I took an example from the more buildings system. So when it comes to making and how you make buildings, there are some key opportunities around what we call industrial construction techniques. So that is where you prefabricate modules from the building offsite, so you can 3D print them in a factory. So hence the industrial, and then you can literally assemble the modules on site, but a lot faster with very little waste, a lot less disruption. So there is an economic productivity gain here, because you can construct buildings faster, but there's also a resource gain because you lose less material. And then, of course, very importantly, if you start mapping what goes into the building and make sure that the materials that go into the building also can be reused, then you suddenly have this entire bank of materials in your city, which is also a hugely interesting. Yeah.
So that's an interesting one, because the way you're describing it makes me think it very closely linked also to the design decisions taken at the design stage.
Yeah.
But also also thinking about the subsequent use, so the access and the operation of the building too. So making is sort of one that brings together many of the phases.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think with building, everyone knows that buildings usually stand for maybe up to 100 years or more. But I think also if you make sure that through the design and the construction of the building enables adaptation or flexibility in the building, they don't necessarily need to stand that long, but maybe you can adapt them so they more respond to the needs a bit better. So also, for an example could be that people, you have a family, you have a flat, you're a family of 4, but then the kids move out, and then suddenly you're only 2, and then you maybe want to have a smaller flat. And then if it was more modular, then you could maybe set up a wall. You could easily there's so many things. So creating more flexibility within the buildings could also increase the use time of them, but also allow more and different uses.
And I liked what you said about the digital side potentially also enabling another thing, because multiple people may be occupants, but if there is a digital passport of some of the materials that have been used during the making phase, then that knowledge isn't just owned by the person who put it together, but it can pass through the different users.
Yeah.
And when it's a user that had nothing to do with the making phase, they can actually still know what's in their building and use that material for subsequent uses.
Yeah, and I think especially when you start reusing materials, that knowledge, like what's been used for, how many times, these kind of things that need to be captured to ensure the quality going forward.
Yeah.
Then the phase we call accessing. I used the example from our products system. So in general, when we talk about the circular economy and consumer versus users, we say there's going to be when it comes to technical products of things you can't eat, we're going to start becoming users rather than consumers. So it's about how increasing people's access to things. So when I want to drill a hole in my wall, I don't necessarily need to get hold of a drill, I don't need to buy a drill. I just need to use a drill for a few minutes. And then I really like this example, a library of things, where it's literally a created library where they have like all sorts of tools and these kind of things that you use once in a while, but honestly, you don't need to have and you don't need to store at home. So you can go and borrow them in a local library.
Okay. So this one relates also, by the sounds of it, quite a lot to the business model that's behind these things. And this is where I guess a strong link to the businesses come in, like how do I get my hands on a drill for just the right amount of time?
Yeah. And a library, that's like one way of creating access to a lot of things, but it could also be renting out baby clothes. Like that's also items that you don't need for very long, but you need a lot of it. And that would, if the quality is really good, then suddenly you can reuse, like several families can reuse them if they just lease them. And so there's like a lot of really great examples of new and much more effective business models around creating access. And then the last one is operating and maintaining. And here's the example from the building system. So when it comes to buildings in I think in the older cities, like for example in Europe, most buildings that's going to stand in 2050 have already been built. I think it's 9 out of 10 buildings will still stand in 2050, and that means that they have not been built according to the most new and updated building designs, and they're not like which means it's also then maybe not as energy efficient as they could be. So refurbishing those buildings and making them more efficient is going to be a big thing that can increase, like really can decrease a city's energy consumption, but also make the living conditions within them a lot nicer. So I mean, I personally lived in a flat with single glazing and electric heating that was both expensive and uncomfortable. So these kind of things is also really important in terms of also decreasing energy poverty in your population. So Great. I know this is a less new and innovative opportunity, but I think when you look at the numbers, it's an important one to highlight.
And it's also often very closely linked to the design decisions that are made up front in terms of how easily you can repair or maintain or exchange things for maintenance, basically.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so that is the structure that sits behind the fact sheets that we've created. And like you said, they're not exhaustive. They're a collection of the sector economy opportunities we identified in 3 systems as they stand and as the technology stands now. And they're very much offered. And we'd love to have subsequent conversations too with others who are interested in pushing some of these things further.
Yeah.
Great. Exactly. Okay. What else have we got in our resources suite?
Yeah, so the next one is our case studies. That was question. There we go. So throughout this project, we also wanted to have some concrete case examples. And Miranda, you were a big part of that. So maybe you can share a bit more context on the case studies.
Yeah. So in the framework that Maja's just run through, there are a lot of examples where businesses are taking actions in cities. You may be wondering what's that got to do with urban policymakers, but we thought it was very important to highlight these because this is often what policy is enabling. So understanding what the business opportunity is really important. Then in this part of the project, we looked at 11 case studies that are specifically driven by city governments. So a moment ago, Maja had a slide up that indicated the 11 case studies that we've so far looked at, and we're open to more. We've got several from Europe, several from the North America, Belo Horizonte in Latin America, and Shenzhen in China. There are definitely more. It was more a question of our resources as to how many we could turn around. But we're looking to add more. One of the things with these case studies is, I mentioned, they're very much examples of where cities have, for example, started mainstreaming circular economy into their procurement. So Toronto was a case where they're currently looking to mainstream the principles of circular economy into the procurement policy of the city, working with multiple departments. So there's a large coordination effort going on. There's coordination internally with all the different stakeholders, and there's coordination externally in terms of working with vendors, understanding their needs, them understanding the potential changes in the procurement policy that's set by the government. So that's one sort of broad cross-cutting example in the case of procurement. And I know someone's asked a question about specific examples, so that's one. And then on the other hand, and this is a nice example of the policy levers working together, San Francisco looked at changing the procurement policy around carpets in public buildings. And they have changed the standard of the carpets that they are going to buy. They've increased it to being compliant with cradle to cradle silver standard, which basically means they've increased the focus on the materials that is within the carpets. And in order to support that change in procurement, they've also set it into law. So they've passed regulation in order to encourage that. And in fact, are we showing a slide right now?
Yes.
That is the case study is about 3 pages long, and they indicate how much money was spent in terms of supporting the project, who was involved internally and externally, the policy levers that were drawn on, the journey that they went through. So where did the inkling of the idea come from? Roughly how long did it take to get through? Where have they got to now? What are they looking to measure? And then a few reflections at the end of some of the learnings so far. And bear in mind that all these cases are, of course, live, and learning does continue. So we will hopefully also try and follow them up and report a bit further in over the course of the year as to where they've got to. So I was going to talk to you about another example, but I thought I'd answer on procurement because we'd had a few questions around that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Should we maybe jump to show the webpage then and do a bit of a round tour of the resources?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to open the page and then share my screen. Bear with me for a moment.
I guess I'll answer in the meantime another question that's come in around fiscal measures. As Maja opens the actual website, we'll flag where the policy document is. And in there, we've captured a couple of examples of fiscal measures that have been changed. Some of them are around like incentives in terms of household waste sorting. Sometimes that's also applicable to business waste sorting. There are examples where perhaps the city itself doesn't quite have the full ability to change all the fiscal incentives and needs to work with national tiers. So there are examples in that document as well of some of those. I think the examples come from Europe, some from North America, also from China. So do take a look in there to find out a little bit more.
Okay, so I just opened up our website, and I think I'm sharing, right? Yes, I'm sharing. So just to first find the project, you go up in the global menu and then just go down to Circular Economy in Cities, and then you arrive on the project page. So here we have the different modules. So first a short introduction, the vision that outlines kind of the key storyline of like high level vision for what circular economy in cities could look like. And that's very much the guiding story for all the content in the fact sheet. So those two go really well together. And that's, I can show it, of course. So that's literally just a little story. And then here we have the fact sheets, as we mentioned. here, and then if you scroll down, you can literally either you can download all the fact sheets per system at a time, or if you specifically, I'm really interested in building design, I can just jump to that one and download that separately if that's what I want.
Also, it's worth saying that if you do want to download them very quickly and you do download all the building fact sheets in one, that download all will come with a summary, which gives you a little bit of a guide as to what comes up in all the different case studies. So Maja's scrolling through it now. That this section shows you the different opportunities that we identified working in partnership with Arab to do so. And then the next page gives an idea of some of the benefits. And we source these from, we try to take as global a view as we could. So some of these come from China, some of these come from the US, some of these come from Europe or Latin America. We have some examples from Africa, although that is an area that we're conscious of needing to develop further.
And then, of course, all the references that we mentioned. So yeah, it's possible to read more on everything. And then the policy levers. So a short intro, the framework, and then you can download the paper directly there.
And if you do download the paper, it is very, obviously you're entitled to print all of these things, but if you are reading them online, this is also quite easy to jump around in this document. So perhaps I should have gone to fiscal, but here's planning. And in this, we've identified the trends that we're seeing emerging, and we've identified cities that are taking action in these different areas. You can see here, for example, where things link back to other modules, we flagged it. If a city is noted in bold, it also means we've currently got a specific case study on it. So the document itself is very easy to move between. So for the person that was asking me about fiscal, you can jump to here and read some of the examples that are explored in here, and then jump back to the overview image.
And then we have the case studies, all the different 11 at the moment. So either you just click on one, and then you can see, like, scroll through.
And as you're, so here's an example. If you know of a city that you think is taking great action on circular economy and you'd like to let us know, you can also drop us a note here. A very, very quick and easy form to fill in. So let us know if you've got suggestions.
Yeah. And then we have the last one, which is, of course, recognizing that we by far are not the only organization in the world working on circular economy and cities. So this page is very much to highlight some of the other international organizations that have resources or tools or insights on this topic that also can help open policymakers or anyone working with the city context further.
So to show you an example, the C40, who are obviously focused on supporting cities and working on their climate objectives. Circular economy is one of the frameworks that they've identified as helping cities to achieve their climate objectives. So here is a little bit of information about C40 and links to some of the work that they've been doing that is specifically linked to circular economy. So if you click on each one of those tiles, you will find a similar information about that organization and what they're doing in that space. Each one of them is different. Sometimes with the EIB, for example, it's a funding guide. With others, it might be links to material flow analysis. With others, it might be links to networks or upcoming opportunities.
Great. I'm just going to see if I can leave the share. How do I do this? Just want to get out. Okay. Now we're back on screen. So should we just use the last couple of minutes to just address some of the questions that we haven't answered yet?
So we've been asked a question about data confidentiality and whether that's an obstacle or not. I think in all the conversations we've had about how digital can enable circular economy, certainly in the example Maja was talking about material passports in buildings, definitely there is a lot of work going on at the moment in terms of identifying who has ownership and access to that information. So I do think this is work in progress. And it's not solved, or at least perhaps solved isn't the right word, because everything's in its infancy. So I think it's a great question to raise and a really important part of material passports continuing to develop.
Yeah.
You went to a conference on this recently, and I think that was one of the big topics that was discussed.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think with that is more getting the information in the right format, because there's no standardized way of creating material passport at the moment.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to transport, I have a lot of mobility examples of cities collecting data and sharing them publicly, and of course that needs to be anonymized and in that way made it safe. So
But there's lots of great projects currently taking place around open access mobility information to improve the flow and reducing congestion and just making it generally easier for people to get around. Another question is around incineration and whether we consider that as part of circular economy. We would look at circular economy, and I seek to create a world where incineration wasn't part of that framework. So finding, and that goes right back to the early parts of circular design and deciding, knowing as you design something what its future use is. There is energy that can be released by burning materials, but really that would for us be a sort of very outer loop option, and it's far better to keep those materials in their original state and in use.
I mean, some would say that there are chemicals in some of the materials products that we have today that is really dangerous if we start circulating them, and that is correct, but then ideally those chemicals would never been put into the product in the first place.
And there are some materials currently that would end up being phased out of a circular economy because there is no way of managing them in a circular way. So there's definitely transition to be had towards that. There's also a question around nutrient flows. Maja and I didn't explore nutrient flows very strongly in this project because we've got an additional project called Cities and the Circular Economy for Food that look much more closely into that. Our colleague from that project is not here to talk about it further, but I think we will be sharing the slides that we've talked through today, and we can include a link to that project too, for you to explore that further. Another question has been around collaboration. And I think in all the examples, even the case studies where the city's been heavily involved in leading something, it has always involved universities, businesses, and the general public. In fact, I think about the case we wrote for Glasgow and for Brussels, which was around their roadmap. And both have said that in the case of Glasgow, it was actually very strongly supported and helped be brought into life by the Chamber of Commerce. So the Chamber of Commerce working very strongly with the council, as well as Zero Waste Scotland from a national government tier. So that's one example of things coming together. In the case of Brussels, one of the measures that they did was actually invest money to support a chair being created at the local university so that the research side could continue locally. And they've also linked up with UN Environment to develop their material flow analysis further and identify more opportunities in which they can convert that. So I can only confirm that in all the cases, collaboration across different organizations has been really important.
See, what do we have left?
What other questions again? Plastics has come up in the project as one of the materials. So we have got the systemic initiatives looking at specific material flows. So we've got plastics, textiles, and food currently live. So we haven't specifically focused on plastics, but plastics, of course, came up when we were looking at products. So there are examples of businesses or innovations that have taken place in cities that pertain to plastics, but probably also to other material flows as well. So there's a sort of cross-cut between our project and then some of the other initiatives that are running at the foundation.
Should we check this one? There's a question asking, if circular economies are centered around the human consumption model, how can design thinking be used as a key enabler and actor of this principle? I'm
not entirely familiar with the term human consumption model, but I think we have looked at circular economy orientated towards meeting human needs. So we haven't started from a position of saying it's about first and foremost, the objective is to drive down consumption. We've started from a position of first and foremost, as businesses and all sorts of organizations seek to meet human needs, and as they use materials in doing so, how are those materials managed? What are the economic opportunities of improving the use of that material? And what are the other benefits of doing this, linking back to the 5 benefit buckets that Maja was talking about. So to recap, economic productivity, job skills and innovation, health and environment, community and social prosperity, and of course, resource use.
Did we have it? I think maybe a final one. This might maybe be good. I think, given time, we only have 2.
We should make the local of it.
Yeah.
I think so in terms, and that's a lovely question actually, following on to what happens next for us now that this project is live. It is completely publicly available. We're delighted to be having this webinar with you so that more people are aware of it. It's very much an offer and there is no single blueprint in any one city. It's not everybody has to start from the same place. Some people have started with material flow analysis. Some people have started with a specific project, for example, redirecting material away from current waste management and into subsequent use. So there's no one start point. The project is offered as a wealth of information organized into sort of structured frameworks that are hopefully easy to remember and work with. It's offered as inspiration. And we're very interested in hearing what kind of projects it inspires in terms of going forward. And where people that are working on this area are interested in one of the specific material flows, we'd love to hear about it. And potentially there are links to the work on plastics, textiles, and food that we are doing. Potentially there's links to other initiatives that we have, or insights in terms of developing the built environment narrative, developing the mobility narrative. So there isn't one single entry point. I would really say it's about understanding the overall concept, taking inspiration, and then linking it back to one's own specific scenario. The previous project that we did, which was the toolkit for policymakers, that offered a bit more of a sort of a model that you could plug data into and then work to identify where key starting points are for your specific context. But this project overall has been very much about presenting the opportunities, the number of ways in which people can engage, and using it to support the uptake of circular economy more broadly.
So I think before we wrap up and let every one of you get back to your everyday day job, what's maybe you could say a few words on what's next on cities from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Well, over the last year, cities have popped up in all our work streams. So recently, I think it's 4 cities have signed the global commitment on reductions around plastic use and changes to the way plastic is managed. We've had a demonstrator project kick off in New York around fashion, helping people know where to take their clothing once they no longer need it, and a partnership with businesses in terms of the reuse and subsequent opportunities with those materials that are returned. And of course, the project around food, which is very closely linked to cities. So in terms of what's next, this project, raising the ambition, raising awareness, leading to, we hope, very much additional projects starting, and where they can be in partnership with one of the programs that we have running, that's excellent. And if it's just sharing information with us in order so that we can continue to advance the take-up of circular economy, that's also a fantastic outcome.
Thank you. I think it's time to wrap up, but I just wanted to thank all of you for taking part and asking us so many great questions. It's been a joy for us. We hope you find the resources useful, and as you start using them, do send us our feedback, comments, other case examples that we may not have included. We would love to hear your feedback and inputs. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.